Okay.
Elaine's gonna be right there.
Okay, I'm gonna stay right here. And here comes Garrett. Garrett, you're late. Excuse me? I don't know. We'll see. He's the chairman.
That's quick, Carmen.
That'll be your birthday picture next year.
Thank you.
You need a light. What are you doing today? Big one. All of you Illinois Rangers.
I think that's more your job.
Hey, how much space?
Huh? So you have a
Thing.
you have a very avid reader who walks by my house every day and steals the post off of my student.
Really?
Yeah, I'm kind of proud, kind of pissed off that he's taking my money, but hey, he's reading the paper.
He's reading the paper.
Or she, but it's got to be he, right? Only dudes give me prizes.
No, older women
You think an older woman? You're saying
actually
here on national
feel,
TV that you think an older woman is stealing
who
my newspaper?
feels entitled. Yes.
Oh, really?
Saying that, and the mic is on.
Yeah, they just walk up to pick up the paper and read the front page.
Exactly. They do, like it's normal. Yeah.
That's my paper. It's on the sidewalk in front of me.
Ambassador to the right to the EU. Someone is ambassador to the EU. But it's not to the EU. Which is
Get closer to it. You're going in for what?
that was where my thoughts.
You're going to get the best shot.
Oh, come on.
Really?
Come on.
Got here 5 minutes ago.
I don't know.
You got anything for his feet?
You had right here.
No, I'm just saying. Yeah. It's like in a recliner.
John, you're good with sound and everything too, right? You're good with sound? You're good with you're good with sound? Okay. Right. That was his nice way of saying, please avoid getting into his frame. Bless you.
Somebody with no hair.
I considered it too dangerous to even try to race in this one.
I looked at one, but it was a strange picture.
Allison looks like Jack Nicholson.
This interview.
Yeah, see, that's the same picture. Like a face. Yeah.
Oh,
Michael who? 2 minutes.
Oh, right.
2 minutes. Over here, sir. Sir.
Good morning. We were informed about an hour and a half ago that by the attorney for Ambassador Sondland that the State Department would refuse to allow him to testify today. This was after conversations well into yesterday afternoon and evening with the State Department legal advisor, in which there was no indication that the ambassador would be a no-show. Not only is the Congress being deprived of his testimony, the American people being deprived of his testimony today, but we are also aware that the ambassador has text messages or emails on a personal device which have been provided to the State Department, although we have requested those from the ambassador, and the State Department is withholding those messages as well. Those messages are also deeply relevant to this investigation and the impeachment inquiry. And I want to just explain for the public the significance of this witness and the significance of the decision, evidently by the Secretary of State and President or both, to withhold this key witness's testimony today. We know from the text messages that Ambassador Sondland was in discussion with Ukrainian counterparts, with fellow diplomatic personnel, and the President, as well as at least one U.S. Senator, about the course of events that we are investigating. We know from those text messages that diplomatic personnel raised a concern with him that military assistance was being withheld to secure help from Ukraine in the President's re-election campaign. We know that Ambassador Sondland had at least one discussion with a fellow diplomat on that very subject of why military assistance was being withheld. We know Ambassador Sondland was a key player in efforts to obtain a commitment from Ukraine to investigate a bogus conspiracy theory about the 2016 election, as well as Joe Biden and his son. And we know that the ambassador has relevant evidence on whether the meeting with the President that the Ukrainians desperately sought with President Trump was being conditioned on these investigations that the President believed would help his re-election campaign. It is hard to overstate the significance of not just Ambassador Sondland's testimony and the documents, but the testimony of others as well. The failure to produce this witness, the failure to produce these documents, we consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction of the constitutional functions of Congress, a co-equal branch of government. There are four issues that we are looking at least four issues that we are looking at, all that go to the heart of our national security. And by preventing us from hearing from this witness and obtaining these documents, the President and Secretary of State are taking actions that prevent us from getting the facts needed to protect the nation's security. We are looking into whether the President solicited foreign help in a U.S. presidential election again. We are looking into the issue of whether a meeting that Ukraine desperately sought with the President at the White House was being conditioned on the willingness of Ukraine to investigate this bogus conspiracy theory about 2016 and investigate the Bidens. We're looking at whether Ukraine was given reason to believe that military assistance it desperately needed to fight off the Russians was being withheld until it made commitments to do these political investigations for the President. And we are looking into the question of whether there has been an effort by the President, the Secretary of State, and others to cover up this misconduct. Ambassador Sondland is an important witness on each of these subjects, but he is not the only important witness. And we will consider this act today, and we've had members fly in from around the country to hear the ambassador's testimony, as well as the withholding of the ambassador's documents, as well as efforts that may be made to discourage or having the effect of discouraging other State Department witnesses from coming forward and testifying, as they have agreed to be further acts of obstruction of a co-equal branch of government. This is one of the few impeachment inquiries in the history of our country It goes to the core of whether the president abused his office to seek political help in his re-election campaign, and did so to the detriment of our nation's security. Did so by effectively coercing a country that has been invaded by Russia to investigate a rival and condition the relationship between this country and that country on whether they were willing to play ball. That is the gravamen of the issues that we are investigating, that this impeachment inquiry is looking into. It is hard to imagine a set of facts more damaging to our national security and our standing in the world, but also more of a fundamental breach of the president's oath of office. The American people have the right to know if the president is acting in their interests, in the nation's interests, with an eye towards our national security, and not in his narrow personal political interests. They have a right to know. Indeed, the American people have a need to know. And through this impeachment inquiry, we are determined to find the answers. Thank you.
That was your office's first contact with the whistleblower.
We understand the reason why the State Department decided not to have Ambassador Sondland appear today. I mean, it's based on the unfair and partisan process that Mr. Schiff has been running. When you think about what the Democrats are trying to do, impeach the President of the United States 13 months prior to an election based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge who has a bias against the President. And the guy running the process, Chairman Schiff, didn't even tell us that he had met with the whistleblower prior to the whistleblower filing the complaint. Adam Schiff didn't tell us the way he treated Ambassador Sondland last week in this, Ambassador Volker in this interview last week. That treatment is the reason why the administration and the State Department said we're not going to subject Ambassador Sondland to the same treatment. And look, we were actually looking forward to hearing from Ambassador Sondland. We thought he was going to reinforce exactly what Ambassador Volker told us last week. But again, unfortunately, when you have a Speaker of the House who says we need to strike while the iron's hot, when you have a chairman of the committee who is so biased against this president that he wouldn't even tell us that he had met with, his staff had met with the whistleblower prior to the whistleblower filing the complaint. And frankly, this is a pattern with Mr. Schiff. He did the same thing, if you remember, the first big hearing the Democrats did this Congress, Michael Cohen. He didn't tell us that his staff had met with Mr. Cohen for hours prior to Mr. Cohen testifying. He didn't tell us that last summer he had met with Mr. Simpson out in Colorado, palling around with the guy with Fusion GPS. So this is a pattern. Like I said, we were hoping to hear from the ambassador today, but we understand exactly why the administration, exactly why the State Department has chosen to say, look, if it's going to be this kind of process, if you're going to selectively leak text messages, 67 pages of text messages we had, and they take a handful and release to all of you, and not give the full context and not release the transcript, we understand why they made this decision at this moment. I'm going to let some of my
Ambassador Sondland says he's disappointed that he wasn't allowed to attend this deposition today.
Yeah, and I said the same thing. We wish he would have been able to testify too, but we fully understand why the administration made the decision they did. When you're going to have a chairman release certain parts of what was said in a closed-door interview and not release the entire transcript and give it context, you can see why they didn't want to subject Ambassador Sondland to the same kind of treatment.
Do any of you have concerns? There is no wrongdoing here. Isn't that all the more reason why he should be allowed to come up and testify and just answer all of your questions?
Yeah, there is no wrongdoing. Ambassador Volker was clear. Remember, Ambassador Volker is... Why not release the transcript so you can all see what Ambassador Volker told us? There is no wrongdoing. He was completely as clear as could be, no quid pro quo whatsoever. The two guys on the call, no quid pro quo whatsoever. Democrat chairman, after they read the transcript, said no quid pro quo whatsoever. But Adam Schiff doesn't want that information out there. So he's holding up the transcript, and he continues to have this bias against the president, the way he runs things.
I believe that I do believe that we'll actually get to hear from the ambassador, but we'll only get to hear from him when there is a fair process. This is not a fair process. I can tell you, we spent more time in the SCIF last time with Ambassador Volker than Adam Schiff did. You know, he came out here, you may have noticed that, he came out here all to the press, and what did he do? He gave this benign thing and then raced off to a fundraiser. So here's what we have to understand, is this has to be a fair process. And when you have a press release being drafted by our Democrat colleagues, cherry-picking text messages, when the full text of Ambassador Volker's testimony last week would have exonerated this president, let's release it. I'm all for bringing the ambassador in, but let's only do so after we release the full.
Do you have any concerns about what we're talking about here? The president asked